In 2017, Fujifilm released the GFX 50S, a relatively affordable digital medium format camera in an attempt to differentiate themselves from needing to directly compete with the mature market segment of full-frame mirrorless cameras from Sony, Canon, and Nikon. I am extremely glad they did this because 6 years later we have this, the GFX 100 II, Fujifilm's flagship medium format camera that sports a new 102 megapixel sensor. The question is, has Fuji done enough to pull away from all of the full frame cameras that have been so ubiquitous over the years? Before we dive too deep, I want to give you guys a preview of what this camera can do. Fuji has consistently marketed their GFX line as more than full frame. I think Fuji has positioned the GFX 100 II as a one-of-a-kind offering. 102 megapixel still images with medium format video at a price point that is $2,500 cheaper than its predecessor. That all sounds almost too good to be true, right? Well, in some ways, it is. Let's start with a quick tour of how this camera handles. The GFX 100 II is bigger than your average full-frame mirrorless camera, but no bigger than older full-frame DSLRs like the 5D Mark IV from 2016. This makes for a solid, balanced feeling camera in the hand that, while a bit heavy paired with their large GF lenses, it does not take away that this is a quality feeling camera from a material standpoint, deserving of its price point of $7,500. The layout of this camera itself is a bit of a mixed bag for me. Fuji has not opted to include a D-pad on this camera, so you're left with just the joystick to navigate the menus. I don't personally like this choice very much because everything you do in the menus on the joystick feels slower or less precise than if I just had directional buttons. I found this particularly annoying when wearing gloves outside in the cold and needing to change a setting that was more than one page deep in the menu. The rest of the camera's layout feels fairly intuitive, with 3 custom buttons just behind the shutter and 2 more at the front accessible via your middle and ring finger. Fuji has given a great amount of customization here, with nearly every button on the camera being assignable to whatever you want. Where I ran into a bit of trouble was there is still no way to assign function buttons differently depending on whether you're in movie, stills mode, or even between custom profiles. For example, I set the first button at the top of the camera to waveform/vector scope, which is nice that we have that tool now, but this tool is only used in movie mode. So if I switch to stills mode, this button becomes useless where it could be a great toggle for the histogram when shooting photos. This means you have to make a choice. Do you assign function buttons that just work for both modes at all times? Or do you assign buttons that are ideal for only one mode, knowing that the more buttons you assign for settings in one mode, the more useless buttons you have for the other? Of course, if you aren't actively switching between the 2 modes within the same shoot day, this may not matter to you, but it is still an option that I would like to see as either a firmware update or in a future camera. Despite my gripes with the joystick and function buttons, I think there is a lot that Fuji has done well. The information on the top display of the camera is actually quite useful due to its size, and the slight slant does actually help readability more than I expected. Going from movie to stills mode is a single switch at the top left of the camera. This is super efficient, which is always nice to see. The media slots and battery are the same as my X-H2S, one CF Express Type B, SD card slot, and the NPW235 battery. This is great because if you own an X-H2S and you pick up this camera, they can work together seamlessly. Lastly, we have the I/O, full-size HDMI, Type-C for SSD recording and power delivery, a full-size Ethernet port, 3.5mm mic input, and curiously, they put the headphone jack on the right of the camera, which is an interesting choice. I'm generally not someone who cares that much about resolution in stills, but there is no denying that 102 megapixels with a sensor this large is a joy to experience. The stills from this camera are as sharp as you would ever want, and the color is, as expected from Fujifilm, excellent straight out of camera. The new Reala Ace film simulation might be my new favorite among all of Fuji's 20 available simulations. The raw files from this camera are huge, about 110 megabytes per shot, but the richness available in editing makes the extra cost in storage very worth it. It honestly feels like cheating to have color this good as your starting point, while also being given the ability to crop nearly as much as you want. Autofocus performance is pretty good overall. It's not going to win any awards among the full frame competition, but considering the size of this sensor, Fuji has delivered impressive performance that for the most part did not make me feel like I was having to think about autofocus issues while shooting. There was the occasional missed opportunity of the fast moving subject that is my son, but even the best full frame cameras have fallen short in this scenario. The AI subject detection also worked well with shots of animals, with the occasional miss where the eyes seemed harder to detect. To my surprise, one of the best parts of this camera is actually the EVF. It's massive, sharp, and it's compatible with Fuji's tilting adapter that I unfortunately did not test for this review. I love shooting low with a tilting EVF when possible. I don't think I've ever used an EVF this good. I wish every camera had this. For all the good so far, I ran into a surprising issue in quite a few outdoor scenarios when using the mechanical and electronic shutter together. When the electronic shutter kicked in, I often got a jello mess of an image back once I got photos onto my PC. This was pretty surprising at first because these were not shots where the subject was moving quickly or at all, and I was relatively stable when shooting. It really shows that for all its improvements, the X Processor 5 in this camera is on the edge of being able to process images off of this sensor. If the work you are doing with this camera is anything that cannot be repeated or has any amount of speed to it, I'd stick to the mechanical shutter at all times. The last thing I want to briefly touch on with the photography experience is this new 55mm f1.7 that was released at the same time as this camera. This is the best lens for this system in my opinion. It's one of two lenses made by Fuji for the GF mount that gets under f2.0, the other being the 80mm. With a roughly 44mm full frame equivalent, I think this lens is the reason to shoot in this format. Very few lenses Fuji has released for the GF mount make it under f2.8, which actually means that wide open, most of them have quite a similar depth of field to a full frame camera. This 55mm offers the unique opportunity to showcase what a wide open digital medium format look can achieve. You won't always be shooting wide open on a camera like this, but when you do, it is fantastic. If you have liked any of the stills from this video or any of my previous videos, I am currently developing my first photo preset pack, and if you'd like to sign up for a free preset from the pack and to be notified when it comes out, please check the first link in the video description. Now on to my favorite question of any hybrid camera. What is the video like? Fuji was clearly determined to get every ounce of potential out of this camera's sensor when it comes to video because there are so many record mode options, each with their own caveats. To spare you from a long list of numbers and potential confusion, I'm going to attempt to sum up my main issues with the various record modes like this. The dream scenario with a robust video mode on a high resolution medium format sensor like this is to be able to shoot open gate. That is the entire sensor width and height at the highest video resolution this camera is capable of, in this case 8K. Unfortunately, that is simply not possible. This camera does shoot 8K, but it is with a significant crop that is actually a smaller field of view than full frame cameras. You also have two other image formats, Pre-Mista, which is a VistaVision sized, slightly wider than full frame, and the 35mm mode, which is your standard full frame. The only mode that really allows you to take advantage of the majority of this sensor in video is the 4K mode. But the disappointing part of the 4K mode is that it's pixel binned, which means that the binned 4K just doesn't look nearly as good as the modes that are cropped in on this camera. I shot an interview in the 4K mode in f-log 2, and while the depth of the shot looked great, the actual texture, detail, and noise of the shot did not really hit compared to most modern cameras that I've used. The cooking montage you guys saw at the beginning of this video was shot in the 35mm mode in 4.8K 16:9, which I think looks much closer to the quality I'm getting out of my X-H2S. So really, what I think Fuji has indirectly done here is made a medium format camera a solid full frame camera in its video mode. This is a disappointment, but it doesn't make the video mode bad. The other thing to consider is that the Fuji GF lenses are really not made for video. They are focus by wire and do not have manual iris and focus gears like a Cine lens does. The autofocus performance in video with the GF lenses was not bad, but it's not quite as sticky as some of the competition, though I didn't expect it to be. It's still impressive that Fuji can deliver the speed that it does with a sensor this large with video autofocus. Overall, I think the image quality in video by full frame standards is excellent on this camera, and I still have to give Fuji credit here. I particularly appreciate that in f-log 2, unlike my X-H2S, the base ISO is a more standard 800, making it easier to expose in brighter conditions. For rigging, I opted to use Kondor Blue's GFX 102 cage, SSD top handle, and their wing side grip for my walk-around setup. I really like this rig. This cage is a similar design to my cage on my X-H2S that I've been using for the last few months. And the best part of this setup is this SSD top handle that allows the use of SanDisk Pro Blade drives. The GFX 102 is the first camera from Fujifilm to allow SSD recording, something I hope gets released as a firmware upgrade for my X-H2S and all future Fuji cameras. I had two 2TB SSDs during my testing, and they were an awesome low footprint way to get a lot of footage without swapping media constantly. They were also great to pull media off of thanks to the fast read-write speed of the drives. A gripe I had when shooting video with the GFX 102 is the way this camera displays over HDMI. There isn't a way to display your settings to an external monitor without having it be super cluttered, getting in the way of your image. This means that in order to keep my monitor image clean and easy for framing, I needed to still refer back to the LCD on the back of the camera for certain settings or access to the menu. But because the on-camera monitor doesn't fully flip out, if you're using a 15mm baseplate, you end up with quite a long rig to make space for the LCD to flip out when necessary. Depending on how you like to rig your camera, this may or may not be an issue. If you make your money doing any form of studio or large print photography, this camera is definitely for you. For those who are intrigued by a digital medium format camera but held back because of things like autofocus performance or the idea that this format is slow, I think this camera could be the entry point that changes your mind. I admire Fuji for being this ambitious with this camera. You could view this camera as a glass half full or half empty. I'm choosing to look at it as a glass half full because despite not being the poor man's IMAX camera that I think every video creator hoped it would be, Fujifilm has delivered on what they set out to do with this camera. They delivered a relatively affordable medium format hybrid camera that takes arguably the best quality stills for the money of any camera, while delivering a video experience that is flawed but is still really good when you can work within its limitations. It's a medium format stills camera that shoots slightly larger than full frame video at a price that is much lower than the previous model. All I can really say is that I can't wait for Fuji to get a faster processor for this format because this camera can only get a lot better, and that is a future I'm excited for.